Okay, today we're going to be learning how we can use the quadratic formula to help us solve an equation if we can't factor it. So first of all, you need to know what the quadratic formula is. It is x equals, so we're figuring out what x equals, we're solving for x, the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. The thing about using the quadratic formula is your equation must be written in standard form to use it. And you want to make sure that it's equal to 0 before you start doing anything with it. So your equation should look like ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using the numbers that are the coefficients of the terms. So we're going to be using the number out in front of the x squared. That's going to be our a. And we're going to be using the number out in front of the x. That's going to be our b. And we're going to be using the constant. That's going to be our c. And all we have to do is we have to take these three numbers and plug them into our formula, and they will tell us what x equals. Okay, so let's do an example. Here we have x squared minus 6x plus 7 equals 0. So it's written in standard form and it's equal to 0. So then I know that I can use it to put into my quadratic formula to solve for x. First thing I want you to do is I always want you to write down what are the values for a, for b, and for c. So in this case, the coefficient of x squared, a, is 1. Remember, if there's nothing there, there's actually a 1 out in front. The coefficient for the x term is -6, and the constant is 7. So I find a, b, and c from my equation. I do want you to write each of these out anytime you're solving using the quadratic formula. All right, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take those numbers and we're just going to plug them into this quadratic formula generic form right up here. So I'm going to say x equals the opposite of b, so we've got opposite of -6, plus or minus the square root of -6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 7, and then that whole thing is over 2 times 1. So my first step is just plugging each thing into the equation, plugging a, b, and c into the equation. Okay, now I'm going to start to evaluate things a little bit. When you are evaluating something big like this, we want to make sure we're following the order of operations. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take care of all of this stuff that's in here under the square root symbol. Well, first let's do the opposite of -6. That's a +6, so I can just change that real quick. And now I've got -6 squared is 36 minus 4 times 1 times 7 is 28. And then that whole thing is over 2 times 1, so I'm just going to write it as 2, because 2 times 1 is 2. Okay, my next step, I'm going to do 36 minus 28. So now I've got 6 plus or minus the square root of 36 minus 28 is 8 over 2. 8 is not a perfect square. That means that our answer is irrational. So at this point, you can leave it like this. This would be what we consider exact form, but you need to keep in mind that this is actually two answers. It is 6 plus the square root of 8, and it is 6 minus the square root of 8, and then both of those numbers divided by 2. Or I can continue on, put some things into my calculator and get the approximate answers. So let's do that. Okay, so let's split it up into the two separate answers. So I've got 6 plus the square root of 8 over 2, and 6 minus the square root of 8 over 2. So now I'm going to put the square root of 8 into my calculator to see what I get. The square root of 8 is 2.83. So this means I'm going 6 plus 2.83 divided by 2. So that would be 6 plus 2.83 is 8.83 divided by 2. And then if I divide that by 2, I get 4.41. So there's one of my answers in approximate form. Or I can do 6 minus the square root of 8. So 6 minus 2.83, since 2.83 is the square root of 8, divided by 2. And if I do that, I get 6 minus 2.83 is 3.17. Divided by 2. So now I divide that by 2 and I get 1.59. There is my second answer in approximate form. So x equals 4.41 or x equals 1.59. And those would be my two answers in approximate form.